this whole thing here. How am I going to move this? There you go. Perfect. All right. With that said, we have a bunch of questions to talk about today. I hope this will bring a lot of value to you. And I just want to say, first of all, that there was a bunch of comments that didn't pop up. I didn't get a notification about them. So if you've written a comment here in the last 24 hours, the reason I have not replied is for some reason the notifications didn't work. I'm going to reply to them shortly. But that said, I'm excited to tell you that we're going to start again with a little success story here. And it is from Abhi, who wrote a question to us a couple of days ago. And she, like many others, had these hypnic jerks. You're about to fall asleep and then you jerk. A lot of us have them. A little subtle. A lot of us don't even know. We don't even notice them. But once you start paying attention, if for some reason you're a little bit worried about something else, you have these jerks, and then they're like, whoa, you can have a lot of them. So anyway, I replied to Abhi, as I always do, give them less attention, know that they're normal, think of them as a sign that you're about to fall asleep, etc. That is the way. And Abhi replied yesterday saying this: "Hi, Daniel. I watched your video today. Thank you so much for answering my question. It was super helpful. After I watched all the videos on your channel regarding hypnic jerks," there is a playlist, by the way, it'll be in the description to this one, "I try not to overthink. So I think it's worth mentioning it's much better, and I fall asleep like I used to before they started. They have definitely decreased the number and intensity. I love my sleep usually. So when I started realizing that this is affecting my sleep, I freaked out. I'm so glad I came across your channel. Thank you." Well, I want to say thank you, Abhi, for sending that initial question and for sharing that you're doing better. So yet again, we have a success story when it comes to these hypnic jerks, and the reason I believe that we have a lot of them is that the cycle, if you will, of these hypnic jerks is shorter. Let's actually, I didn't plan this, but let's try to use the model here and say this. Circumstances in this case is like in Abhi's case, that there was some general stress, right? Which means that you're a little bit hyper aroused, you're kind of on the lookout, you're a little alert, a little bit anxious, right? And you have these hypnic jerks. So that's kind of circumstances here. Circumstances are things you cannot control, or that you're kind of anxious and you notice you notice a hypnic jerk. And then as you're in this kind of hyper aroused state, you start thinking, whoa, that was unusual. What is that? And that thought makes you more anxious. And then that leads to your action of like paying more attention, like maybe reading up and things of that nature, which results in you actually, having more hyperarousal and more jerks, which then reinforces your thought that, whoa, something is really, really going on. And then this kind of becomes a loop where you become more anxious, you pay more attention, give them more attention, resulting in more hyperarousal. You feed this loop where you become really worried about the hypnic jerks. And then what happens is circumstance becomes you come across my YouTube channel, for example, and then you learn that these are actually normal. It's nothing, they go away when you start paying less attention. Then your thoughts change and you think, oh, well, this is actually nothing to worry about. Guess what? Then your emotions change. You become less hyper aroused. And then guess what? You start paying less attention. You do less things, which results in you have less of these hyperarousals, these hypnic jerks, which then again emphasizes your thought. Oh, there's nothing to worry about. So you can see here how this model is super helpful. But what I really want to point out here was that when it comes to hypnic jerks as opposed to insomnia, these are quick cycles. You can go from noticing the hypnic jerks over a couple of days and having a lot of them to learning that there's nothing to worry about. And this can reverse quickly. Versus like insomnia in general, trouble sleeping in general, these are much longer cycles. Circumstances are over weeks or months. And thoughts develop over months, etc. So that's why I think hypnic jerks, you often see pretty quick turnaround. When it comes to insomnia in general, it often takes much longer and it involves more work. But anyway, Abhi, awesome that you're doing better, and thanks so much for sharing that. And with this said, I want to actually turn to a comment before we go to the emails. And this is from Firas. It's a comment. Can't see which. This is on Ask Daniel number 31. Firas asked the following: "Hi Daniel, Thank you for taking the time to answer my questions. You mentioned that CBT and CBT-I are different. Could you explain more in your next video? Absolutely. So CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and it is an approach to things like anxiety, depression, PTSD, insomnia, etc., that involves education, learning about like what's going on, and also using like kind of the cognitive model, which actually this is a version of the cognitive model, kind of understanding your brain, etc. In CBT, I think what it's really stressed in CBT is kind of challenging thoughts. Like you think you're worthless, and then you're like, okay, well, what do you think other people think? Why do you know, like something like that, and you kind of challenge your thoughts. That's kind of a key component of CBT in general. Now, CBT-I, we add the I, that is that cognitive behavioral therapy approach, but tailored towards insomnia, difficulty sleeping. And I think it is actually very different, because I have had on this channel CBT therapists who really didn't understand CBT-I. And that's common. You often have psychologists who are like CBT trained psychologists, counselors, etc., but really don't know how to approach sleep at all. So I think for anyone out there, I think it's important that you find somebody, if you're looking for somebody like a licensed counselor or something like that to work with, that person is experienced with CBT-I. And to very briefly summarize, like kind of like my thinking about CBT-I is that it has kind of two components. One is education, learning why you have trouble sleeping and learning about sleep physiology, etc. And then behavioral modification, which really centers around like spending less time in bed and leaving the bed if you can't sleep. And traditional CBT-I, if you go back to my first videos, my first month maybe, I was really like CBT-I is the thing. You gotta get CBT-I, find some CBT-I. Since then, I've come to think of traditional CBT-I as much better than almost anything you hear about, for sure, 100%. But that there are some inherent problems with CBT-I too. It's very technical. When you say CBT-I, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, that's not very like approachable. Sleep restriction doesn't sound great. Cognitive restructuring, which this is like, what are you going to do to me? That's problematic. It's all very academic, you know, and also it is, I think CBT-I is too like it's too emphasized on spending less time in bed. It's almost like, you know, you just gotta force yourself to be really sleepy to force yourself to sleep. It's often like that, which doesn't work, because if your thoughts, or if you really believe that you can't sleep, something's wrong with you, that's not going to work. You know, you have to do the thought work. And that's where I think traditional CBT-I is very, very good, but I think we can do better. I think we can do better than that. So those are my thoughts. And thanks, Firas, for staying in touch. And with that said, we have a couple of emails, and we are going to start with this one from Brittany. Came in 2 days ago. Let's read it. In fact, I'm grabbing a little pen and paper here, take some notes. Hi, Daniel. I've been listening to your videos for the past month or so, and I've started to gear up for and implement CBT-I. I've struggled with insomnia off and on for a few months, at a time at various points, but this has been my longest, most grueling stretch with it. It began 2 years ago after the birth of my second child, and 6 months of getting up every 2 hours through the night with him. After he started sleeping, I did not. I tried implementing CBT-I twice a year ago, and both times my progress was thrown off about 2 to 3 weeks in, and I had to stop. The first time I got the flu, followed by travel and holidays, and I thought it wasn't a good time. The second time, my son was getting an ear infections and up through the night, throwing off my rhythm. After a year of trying every sleep supplement, including a few months on trazodone, I was ready to try CBT-I again. I started with struggling to fall asleep for the first year, but for most of the last year, I have been plagued with waking 3 to 4 hours of sleep and not being able to get back to sleep again. Trazodone was very helpful most nights at helping me get back to sleep, but after about 3 weeks, it would stop working for a week or two, and then I would have to struggle during that time and start again. So when I began CBT-I, I was getting about 7.5 hours of sleep with the trazodone. I stopped the trazodone and began CBT-I for a 7.5 hour sleep window. And for those of you who are new here, like the sleep window is like when you decide I'm going to spend less time in bed, you usually say like, I'm going to spend 6 hours in bed or 6.5 or something like that. And then what you do is like you pick a wake up time, let's say that's 6 a.m. and then you say, okay, 7.5 hours before that, I'm not going to go to bed earlier than 7.5 hours before that. So that's what Brittany is describing here. The first week I was surprised. I was able to get back to sleep after waking, but I still was only averaging 5.5 hours. So I cut my window to 6.5 hours, knowing that the real reason I was getting 7.5 hours of sleep before starting was from the medication that I was now not taking. So for the past 2 weeks, I have had a 6.5 hour window. The first week I did average 5.5 hours. So I was really pleased with getting that amount with a shorter window. However, for the past week, my sleep has really regressed. I have had several nights with trouble getting to sleep or staying asleep, and I've had several 3-4 hour nights of sleep, which probably an average of 4.7 hours. The first times I did CBT-I, I tried a later bedtime, but realized it really made it difficult for me and gave me sleep onset insomnia. I have a strong sleep drive around 10, 15, 30 every night where I'm nodding off. If I try to push through this, I end up with a second wind that leaves me on alert for hours. This time I tried to have my window start at 10:30 and made my wake up earlier at 5 a.m. I'm concerned that with having less sleep this past week, I may need to shorten my window again. Do I need to do this? I feel very anxious about waking earlier than 5. I tried one night to push my bedtime to 11 and ended up having my worst night of sleep when the second wind just kicked in. Just not sure if I can keep my 6.5 hour window or if I need to reduce it. And if so, where should I take time off? Do you have any insights on this? I'm also home with 2 small children, and they are exhausting during the days. So I do have some pressure to get sleep, to care for them, which worries me, making my window too small. I've been taking 15-minute power nap around 2 p.m., which helps me have energy for afternoon. Okay. All right. Brittany, thanks so much for reaching out. And let's do this. My kind of like big picture and why I read this email is, first thing, I'm excited. I'm excited that you are ready to put in the work and do the CBT-I that you've been kind of trying in the past and never kind of completely committed to, got derailed by some things, etc. That's exciting. Number 2, big picture thing here when I read this is that I think the most important thing to do is the set it and forget it, meaning pick a sleep window that is not like super tight, that is like reasonable, like 7.5 hours or 7 hours, something like that. And then refraining from the urge and like the desire to adjust it, because that is such a trap. That's such a rabbit hole when you're like, okay, this 6 hour window didn't work. I'm going to go to 5.5. No, now this happened. I'm going to go to 7. And what happens is, when you adjust that sleep window, you want to know how that's working. So then you kind of keep track. And as you know from listening to my channel here, the more attention sleep gets, the more sleeplessness you get. So all this kind of tweaking and changing it and trying to find the ideal one produces so much insomnia. It is super important to decide on a sleep window and then commit to it for, normally I say 2 weeks, but when I read this, I'm like, more. Like somebody has so much back and forth, pick a sleep window and commit to it for like 3-4 weeks, something like that. I think that is super, super helpful. That is the big one here. Now we're going to go through a little bit of like the details here. And first, actually, I want to start in the end here. The 15-minute power nap, I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that's a problem at all, because I think that will help you get through the rest of your day and not fall asleep too early in the evening. I think that's totally, I don't see any problem there at all. Now, you have 2 children, so I do have some pressure to get some sleep. That is a problem thought. Going to our model here. Let's say, circumstances, the things we cannot change, right, are that you've had trouble sleeping for a while. You tried a lot of things, you've gotten to a point where you're ready to commit to CBT-I, etc. Those are kind of the circumstances here. Now, one of your thoughts is, I have 2 small children, which means I really got to get sleep overnight. Now, what emotion is produced by that thought? And I forgot to say this, but anyone who's new, or for you too, Brittany, I've just completed the model, and there's a playlist called The Model. I think it is extremely important where I go over this model in detail. But that's it. The problem thought here is, it is, since I have 2 small kids, it is very important for me to sleep at night. And I'm not saying that I'm not talking about like if this is true or false. Not at all. What I'm talking about here is this a helpful thought, or is it not a helpful thought? And I definitely think this is a problem thought, because that thought makes you anxious. You feel pressure to sleep. There's more value. There's like the value of sleep is kind of like heightened by the fact that you need to take care of the 2 kids. So you're more frustrated, and that leads you to kind of like pay more attention to sleep, tweak things, like really pursue sleep. You're trying to sleep, which results in sleeplessness, which reinforces your thought, oh my gosh, I really need to get sleep. It's so important. Now, if you can move to your goal thought, and that goal thought should be, the goal thought, the ideal, perfect goal thought is like, it doesn't matter. I could do fine even if I don't sleep a wink. That is an amazing thought if you can have that one, but that is very, very hard. So I think a more realistic goal thought is something like, I think I can do fine even after sleeping a little. If you try that on, if you just say that to yourself, I think I can sleep fine even if I don't sleep that much, and you get kind of like, oh, hopeful, you feel good. You can adapt that goal thought right there and then. You can be like, that's my goal thought. That I'm gonna keep that thought. If you try that on, if you try to say like, I think I can do fine on very little sleep, and you feel like, oh, that doesn't sit right, it doesn't feel good, then that means you're not ready to adapt that thought. So you go for a neutral one, which is like, instead of like, it is so important for me to sleep a lot or well, or quite a bit because I have 2 small children, then find something like, there have been times in the past where I have slept really very little, and I had an okay day. Something like that, neutral. That could be like your bridge thought towards your goal thought. All right. So showing you here how this model works, I think is super important, and I'm going to be talking a lot about it as we move forward. So that's a big one. Now, we already talked about like the overall picture when it comes to sleep window. I think it's just set it and forget it with that one. Now, another one is that I want to do one more here, and we'll probably move on, but I want to do one more here, which is, I started trazodone. I was getting about 7.5 hours sleep with trazodone. And then the first week I was surprised, blah, blah, blah. What was it that said that? It was something like trazodone was really helpful, but after about 3 weeks, it would stop working for a week or 2, and then et cetera. Here's the thing. So I have come to believe that, I've always talked about how medications cannot make us sleep. They cannot produce sleep. But I've talked about how they can like reduce hyperarousal, which is the thing that keeps us from sleeping. Anxiety, stress, excitement, hyperarousal. And but what I hadn't really understood there was that is also just thought related, meaning, going back to the model, hyperarousal is an emotion or an emotional state. I'll just call it an emotion, or it's just a kind of an umbrella term. But let's just say it's a bunch of emotions that we lump together as hyperarousal. So we still put it here in emotions, right? Emotions are produced by thoughts. All our emotions are produced by thoughts. That is extremely important, because then we see that emotions cannot, no medication, supplement, or pill can ever change your emotions. It is just not possible, but they can change our thoughts. So what can happen is this: you can have kind of an underlying belief that I can't sleep, but then you have this medication which tags on the additional thought, like I can't sleep, but this medication can help, right? And then when you have that thought, that leads to you feeling kind of hopeful, which leads to you to taking the medication, and then you sleep some more, but it's nothing to do with the medication. It's that thought, this medication will help me sleep, that reduces hyperarousal. That's what ends up in resulting in you sleeping more. And the problem here is that result now feeds back to your thought, which is, I can't sleep, but this pill helps me sleep, right? And that can go on for a while, which is getting better. But then there's some additional stressor, right? There's some circumstantial change, and that leads you to, to have the circumstances, like it's unrelated to the one we talked about, but like the circumstantial change, you think, oh my gosh, whatever it is, like my job is not going well, you become hyperaroused, you do some things, you don't sleep well, and then that thought we talked about from the beginning is challenged because the result isn't there. So, but the problem becomes your new thought becomes, I can't sleep, and now this stopped working. And the whole, like, the baseline thing I want to convey here is that your problematic baseline thought, which is I can't sleep on my own, or I can't sleep like that, is unchallenged. So again, these thoughts are so important. So like the goal for everyone really is to tackle that big one, like I can't sleep, or there's something wrong with me, or that one. If you haven't tackled that one, like, it is very hard to move forward. Very hard to move forward. And as we move along here, I'm going to talk more and more about how to work with thoughts, etc. So I hope this really, really helped, Brittany. I want to say stay in touch. I think the key thing for someone like yourself is set it and forget it. Set that sleep window, and then just don't question it. Just move through, move forward, and I think you'll see a lot of improvement from that. But yes, stay in touch and let us know how things go, Brittany. All right, we have Ernest is back. Hey, Ernest. I recently had a setback, but within 2 days, my sleep came back to normal. I really just used mindfulness and shifting attention. Love it. Love it. Absolutely love it. Ernest has been contributed a lot to the channel here, and did some really good work. And you see, someone like Ernest has had trouble sleeping, had kind of like a couple of days where it slept little, but didn't react to it. Mindfulness, shifting attention, back on track. Love it. And thanks for sharing, Ernest. It really means a lot. Cara had a question here. And initially, I think we connected with Cara in February, and then one day ago, she said the following. Thanks for your most recent reply. I have a new question for you. My main sleep issue has always been initially falling asleep. I'm now starting to think that the majority of nights where it's taking me a very long time to fall asleep, that I actually fall asleep very quickly, but something jars me awake, and then I'm up for a while. Of course, with not looking at a clock, which is good, a lot of this is perception and speculation. I asked my sleep therapist about it, and she didn't have much to say, just suggested I get a sleep study. Do you have any thoughts? Well, first of all, like, nothing here is medical advice, just me sharing my thoughts, etc. So if a doctor or health, licensed therapist or whoever you get your care from thinks that you should do something, well, then I'm not going to argue with that, of course. Like, always listen to your doctor. But let's see. So I want to say this, that there's oftentimes people with trouble sleeping identify their sleep issues as either like sleep maintenance insomnia, where you fall asleep okay, but you wake up and then have trouble falling back asleep, or sleep initiation insomnia, where it takes longer to fall asleep that initial time. In reality, from my perspective, somebody who takes care of people with insomnia all the time, it's all the same. And when I say that, I mean the underlying thing that keeps insomnia going is always the same. It's always that hyper arousal, like heightened alertness, attention to sleep, etc. So although it may seem important to note a difference between like it takes longer to fall asleep or like sleep maintenance, but in reality, as in terms of like the results, like, and the result you want to get is you want to sleep well, right? In terms of like getting the results you want, it doesn't really matter what's going on. More importantly is this, that someone who sleeps really, really well sleeps really, really well because they're not paying any attention to how they sleep, right? And they're not doing anything to sleep. That sleep is a passive process. Sleep can only happen when we're not trying to sleep or like focused on our sleep. So where I'm getting towards here is that to try to kind of like classify your sleep or think about, was it this, is it this, what's happening, etc., always leads to more attention, more hyperarousal, and the best thing to do is always to be like, it doesn't matter what type of, like, how what type of trouble sleep I have. As long as I don't pay any attention, it'll get better. That's kind of my initial thought there. And the second one is, you're starting to think that you actually fall asleep, but then something wakes you up, and then I'm up for a while. I want to say this, that waking up, if somebody's snoring a lot, for example, like snoring like crazy, they wake up choking, that's maybe sleep apnea. Or if you have something obvious, like some pain that wakes you up, then maybe the waking up is a sign of something that needs to be addressed. True. But my general thought here is that waking up from sleep is normal. Waking up is a normal part of sleep. When you do sleep study on somebody, you see that person wakes up multiple times. It is the reaction to waking up that is often the problem. When somebody that doesn't have trouble sleeping wakes up, they go, oh, I'm awake, all right, turn over, fall back asleep. But if you've had trouble sleeping, you wake up and you're like, dang it, I'm awake again. It's going to take me so much time to fall asleep. And then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I want to say that is my big thought. I want to say it's amazing that you're not checking the clock. I think that it's good. And I'm super happy that you're staying in touch here. And I hope this is helpful, Cara. If I kind of didn't answer the question well, then please let me know and I'll clarify. And with that said, we are going to move on to another question, and this is from Anne. All right, and here, this is the question. I can't sleep at all. The title is Severe Insomnia. I've been to many MDs, the natural MDs, and they say they can help. But I think I answered this one. Yeah. I answered this one, but there was a follow-up from Anne, and this is the one. Okay. Hi, Daniel. I did listen to your Ask Daniel 37 broadcast. I've had CBT twice and didn't get far, even though I followed all the advice every day, and the MD more or less gave up, as I was always in the same spot of not sleeping past 2 hours. Going to bed and getting up at the same time does not work for me, as I'm very rarely sleepy at night. After sleeping for 2-3 hours straight, I'm not ready to get up in the morning, nor do I want all that bright light coming to my eyes. I know about thoughts for some people and they're not being able to sleep. I don't think about anything when I lay down at night, just like I didn't when I could sleep. I can't be concerned with all the problems that happen in the world. That's my husband, but he still sleeps all night. One thing that works for me is eating a couple of hours after I wake up. Sometimes I'm starved when I wake up, but my blood sugar doesn't put me in the hypo range. If I eat small meal, no sugar, mostly healthy fats and proteins, I'm able to go back to sleep usually, but then I have been awake for a long time, although not for that long. I've checked my blood sugar many a time, and very rarely do I fall into hypo range. I've had the cortisol testing, and sometimes my cortisol is high, sometimes it is low, and it's been flatlined all day, but I'm not tired with any of it. I have left the bed and bedroom many times to do something, and I will be awake for the next few days, and I will never go back to sleep. When I do get sleepy, sometimes it's when I can't be sleeping, driving, etc. The bedroom is pitch black at night, and we don't have any phones, so we don't have to deal with that at night. I'm very hot at night, but I can't do anything about it because of menopause, and my husband is cold, so he's on. I just want this to end, as I've had this for 30 years and nothing has worked for me. Going to work on 2 to 3 hours of sleep is murder. Although I can do my job perfectly all day, I'm not tired, and no one knows that I don't sleep at all. I have never had any health problems because of this, but there has to be something out there that will work for me. I just wonder about hyperarousal on my nervous system and talking in your sleep. I talk in my sleep a lot, and sometimes it wakes me up. And other times my husband tells me I carry on conversations with him, waking up, or he thinks I'm on the phone. I've talked in my sleep from the time I was a baby, learning to talk. All right, Anne. Well, thank you for staying in touch and starting towards the end here, so don't forget it. The talking in sleep is, interestingly, it's like not really, I guess it's not even a parasomnia. It's interesting because it's different from like sleepwalking and night terrors, which are classified as like non-REM parasomnias, and then we get REM behavioral disorders. Sleepwalking is like, it happens in all sleep stages. It's not known to have any like effect on your quality of sleep, etc. It's kind of like very benign, So just sharing that. Now, the one thing that stands out in this email is the word work. We've heard that a couple of times. We heard that eating small meals kind of works, and but nothing has worked before that, and there must be something that could work for me, etc. And whenever I hear that, like CBT-I didn't work for me, or this other thing didn't work for me, my spidey senses go, this person is looking for something that will make them sleep. When I hear like this didn't work for me, I hear that didn't make me sleep. And then I immediately think, that's impossible. You cannot produce sleep. There is nothing out there that can produce sleep. In fact, whatever you do with the intent of purpose of producing sleep is called a sleep effort. And sleep efforts always produce insomnia. And it goes back to the passive nature of sleep. Sleep only happens when you're not trying to do anything to sleep. And whenever you're thinking in lines of like, let's see if this works, there must be something that works, you are producing effort. You're trying to sleep. You're kind of trying to force sleep, if you will. That leads to so much trouble sleeping. So I think it is extremely helpful for anyone out there to know that you cannot, nothing, if you think of like, if you're looking for something that will make you sleep, you will look forever. You'll never get past your insomnia. You know, as long as you look for something, if you're looking for that thing out there that's going to make you sleep, you're going to be looking forever, and you're going to have trouble sleeping probably forever. So that is extremely important, I believe. And also, like the general gist of this email is also someone who is trying to understand why they have trouble sleeping, trying to figure out what's going on. Is it the cortisol? Is it the meals? Is it the bedroom? Or is it lights, etc.? It is, you know, when people make that a huge step for people towards sleeping better is when they go, oh, insomnia is it's just, you know, it's just driven by my thoughts and emotions and habits, you know. And there's nothing wrong with me. My brain is working. My sleep system is working despite what I've experienced. And people stop looking for the thing. They stop looking for what caused their sleep. They stop looking for like something that will make them sleep. That is when sleep starts to happen. I want to say, like, I know it's very, very hard. You know, you've had trouble sleeping for 30 years. So I don't expect anyone to listen to what I say and be like, okay, I get it. You know, I just have to change my thoughts and I'll sleep well. It's such a unbelievably huge leap to take that I don't expect anyone to be able to do that. So I'm thinking, like, somebody like yourself, and like, you know, there are people out there who really understand insomnia that can work with you if you want to work with them. And I want to mention my good friend Martin Reed, R-E-E-D is the last name, first name Martin. insomniacoach.com, and then we have Stephanie Romashevsky. I'm not going to try to spell her last name. It's a tricky one, but sleepyhead.co.uk. She has a program. I'm going to be working with people very shortly. If you like apps and like texting, then bedtime with the Y, bedtyme.co. You can sign up there to get notified when that is available. It's like a curriculum in an app, plus you can text me anytime and I reply. I'm starting this other. I'm going to starting like a program based on this model that I think will be super helpful for people. It's going to be under the sleepcoachschool.com. So those are some options there. And like, stay in touch. And guess what? Oh yeah. I almost forgot. For Brittany, if you're still there, and I think Holland, who we're going to talk about in a second. For all of you, I strongly recommend that you check out this model, the videos I made about the model, and like, try to use it, experiment with it, try to identify what your problem thoughts are, identify goal thoughts, and just, you know, kind of start thinking in those lines. I think that'll be super, super helpful. All right. So with that said, we are going to move to this question from Holland. And I know I know we've been in touch before, but anyway, let's read this. Hi, Daniel. I was really hoping to be writing you a success story this week, but I've had some drawbacks. When the quarantine went into effect, I was on 50 milligrams of mirtazapine and practicing CBT-I, but still not sleeping very well. I decided to use the quarantine as an opportunity to be really brave and ditch the meds and continue with everything CBT-I. The first night was sleepless, but after that, for 2 weeks, I fell asleep within 30 minutes, slept 4.5 to 5 hours. A couple of nights, I even managed to fall back asleep! ! I know this isn't a ton of sleep, but I felt great. I was completely content, although I was still anxious about sleep during the day. Then one night, I didn't sleep at all. Took your advice and didn't change anything, went back to sleeping for another week. Then another nearly sleepless night hit, followed by another, followed by another. I was so shocked. I know that's bad. I went back to meds. I've been practicing CBT for months now, and I'm noticing the same pattern. Every time I start a new med or no med, I look at this as an experiment. Yeah, exactly. Not caring as much how I sleep, more just observing, and I sleep pretty well. Then by 2 to 3 weeks, that becomes the sleep expectation, and my sleep starts to deteriorate till I decide I need to change something, and the pattern continues. I'm extremely analytical and have been told since I was a child that I'm too smart for my own good. My questions are, how do I get success to stick? It seems that instead of building sleep confidence, I build sleep expectations. How do I stop the mental chatter about my sleep? My thoughts are obtrusive and unfortunately negatively skewed. Instead of thinking, yay, I had a great night of sleep, things are getting better, I tend to think it was a good night, which probably means tonight won't be. I don't want to think like this, but I'm not sure how to stop. Can CBT still work for me if I've been doing sleep restriction and stimulus control for months? Holland, thanks for staying in touch. And okay, let's really focus on some positives here, which is I was really hoping to be writing a success story. I mean, just the mere fact that at some point you thought about writing a success story, that's huge. I really think that is amazing. Like, that means you have hope. Even you writing this email means you have hope, and that is awesome. I firmly believe anyone who doesn't give up, people that keep emailing me here, asking me questions, like kind of keep working, always do better. There will be that moment where insomnia is kind of a spiral. Start with something, then it spirals, and you can reverse that. It could be like a magic moment where you start feeling hopeful, and it reverses, like you have a spiral in the opposite direction. And now, when it comes to I think if I'm reading this correctly, that whenever you look at something as an experiment, that's super problematic, because again, insomnia loves attention, and when you're experimenting, you're doing exactly that. That's literally like what you do in an experiment. You do something and then you observe what's going to happen, right? And the more you give sleep attention, the more hyper arousal you have, and that causes so much sleeplessness. So when it comes to medications and anything, it's so important to set it and forget it, to be either decide I'm going to take this medication and I'm going to take it for, I'm fine with taking this medication indefinitely, the same dose, same time, every night, make it a non-factor. If it's a non-factor, then if you sleep good or not, it doesn't depend on the medication, that's helpful. Or don't take it at all, and the experimentation is such a big problem, which I think you already know. Now you're extremely analytical. Maybe you can use that in your favor, meaning if you could use that extremely analytical skill towards anything else, if you can find something you can analyze in the extreme, that will take attention away from sleep. That will be super helpful. So you can kind of use that trait, if you will, to your advantage. And so that's that one. Yeah, and I think the first part of this email where you see I did well, it's that better, had a sleepless night, didn't change anything, got better, and then finally went back to meds. That's kind of one of those where my thinking is part of your brain probably was thinking maybe I have to go back on meds, or there was the door wasn't completely shut. There was that little sliver, a little opening, And that, again, like when people stop taking medications as an experiment, that experiment always fails. It has to be a decision. It has to be like, I've stopped and I'm not going to take it forever. That decision, if somebody can make that decision, then that in itself is kind of like, I've made a decision. That reduces hyperarousal in itself. Now, how do I get success to stick? How do I stop the mental chatter? Can CBT still work for me? I think, and this is like when I read this, I revert back to this. I think this is it. I think for someone that does all the stuff I've talked about until like recently, set it and forget it, like, that works great for someone who has thoughts and belief systems that are not very entrenched, people that are not super analytical, like really deep into like, into forming beliefs, etc., like that. But if the kind of like, if just set it and forget it doesn't work, then I think you have to do the thought work. You have to learn this model, right? And identify your problem thoughts. Just play around with it. Like what you can do is like take a sentence like, anything like, when the quarantine went into effect, I was on 50 milligrams of practice of CBT-I and still not sleeping very well. And then you can experiment with that. Is that circumstance? The quarantine, that was circumstance. You had nothing, you can control that, right? You were taking 50 milligrams of mirtazapine. That is circumstance. So you would like put that here, and I was still not sleeping well. I would also call that circumstance. And then put thoughts here and emotions here, and like choose one thing, like choose one emotion or an action, and then if you choose an action, say like this or a result. It's like, I'm not getting the result I want. Okay, and you go back to what action is producing this result, what emotion is going back underlying that one, and what is the thought behind the emotion. And then you identify the problem thought, and then you can find a helpful thought and work your way towards that. I really believe in this so much. And to try to give you something more tangible right here and right now, I think we already talked about it, actually. Set it and forget it. Your sleep confidence will happen when you become more comfortable with the idea of not sleeping well, when you allow yourself to have more sleeplessness, and you stop experimenting. I think that is it. Like when you see that, because all this experimenting is like, it's always that underlying thought, like I can't sleep on my own, something is wrong with me. But when you are vulnerable, when you are opening yourself up to the possibility of not sleeping, and you see that, guess what? I've been sleeping well now for 3 weeks without doing anything. That's when sleep confidence happens. How to stop the mental chatter. Thought downloads are good. Pick a time every day where you just write down everything that's on your mind, and do that exercise. That helps. How do I change my thoughts? That's funny you asked that, because that's what this is all about, changing thoughts. So I think this will help with changing thoughts. And can CBT still work for me? Absolutely, 100%. It's just a matter of the thought work, yeah. And so again, I say the same thing to you, Holland, as I said to who was this, Anne, that this is meant to be like a do-it-yourself channel. Like, I'm here answering any questions, but sometimes you may need extra support. And then you got Martin Reed, you have Stephanie, myself soon. So we're all there to help. Cool. All right. So we're gonna finish up with, I think, maybe a few questions from Malena. All right. Is this the one? I think so. Hi, Daniel. So this question is a follow-up to my questions on the comment section. Yes, I agree that trying to find if melatonin or GABA are the reason why you have insomnia is just going to be a rabbit hole. But if that were true, do you think that it's the reason why 20 to 30% of people that try CBT are not successful? I don't think those two are necessarily related. I think that the reason like 20 to 30% of people who try CBT are not successful is, I think I mentioned this actually earlier today, is that CBT-I is kind of like, that expression, like, if you give someone a fish, they will eat for one day. If you teach them how to fish, they will feed themselves for like the lifetime. But maybe not. You teach someone how to fish, but they're still not insecure or whatnot. I think that the missing piece of CBT-I is like you have not been taught how your mind works. You're still relying on a therapist kind of telling you what to do. And that's why I think this is so important. Like, you have to understand how your mind works to get that to 100% success happens. I believe when you understand how your mind works and you understand how sleep works, when you know those two things, I think, nothing can hold you back. Nothing can hold you back. But that's my belief on that one. All right. So where is it? There was more questions, but let's see if I can open this correctly. Here. Okay, I think that was not a question there. And thank you for speaking up. All right, I think the question is here. All right. Asking, here it is, sorry. Hi, Daniel. I don't know if this is a silly question, but this just came to my head while making dinner. Why do you think, or what do you think that most cases of chronic insomnia is psychological? I think I know what your answer is going to be. I just want to hear the explanation. Is this evidence-based, or just by listening to insomniacs and understanding how emotional it makes them feel? By the way, I had a bad night last night, but I'm hoping it's a little hiccup. As I've been on bed restriction, I was doing well over a week. That's amazing. Super happy doing well over a week. I allow myself 8 hours in bed, getting around 7 hours or so. But last night, I think I had 5 hours or so. Took a long time trying to sleep. I noticed I was getting a little anxious, and I ignored it. I think that's, I don't know if that's the way to go. I think, here's the thing, and we're going to talk about this more going forward, but anxiety is part of like the spectrum of emotions that we feel. Anxiety and any other negative emotion, they become a real problem when we try to avoid them, when we fight them, try to do things. And like, if you feel anxious and like, what am I going to do about this anxiety? Can I do this? Can I do that? That's when you're teaching your brain that it has to fear anxiety. It becomes this weird thing when anxiety becomes a threat, and when you don't ignore it, don't, let it be there. Don't react to it. That's totally the way to go, because then you're teaching your brain, no, you don't have to be worried about that. Absolutely. Now, I think, and I mean to do an episode on this where I talk about how insomnia, trouble sleeping, is, in my mind, never a hardware issue. There's nothing wrong with the wiring, with your brain, with your anything like physical in your body. It is a software issue. It is a problem of how you interpret what's happening, your thoughts, beliefs, and habits that follow, the habits that develop because of the thoughts and beliefs you have. Now, is this based on evidence? It's impossible to really prove that. Like, how could you ever prove that it is psychological versus like physical? But you can, like, you can't do like a study or an experiment proving that, but you can kind of prove it by just thinking about it. Meaning, if someone slept very little or took a long time to sleep, or they woke up a lot and then fall back asleep, but they didn't think of it as a problem, they wouldn't have insomnia. So by definition, insomnia is it's completely perception based. Insomnia is when you feel or think that I can't sleep, it takes a long time to fall asleep, I struggle with sleep, I can't get enough sleep. That is insomnia. So if you don't have that psychological aspect, if you don't think of it as a problem, then you don't have insomnia. So in a way, by definition, insomnia has to be quote unquote psychological, because it is about how you react to something or how you feel or think about something, right? So I hope that answered this question. And then we have finally here. I'm asking because most people that have insomnia think something is wrong with them physically. Exactly. They feel twitching and other sorts of things going throughout the body. But most of the time, this is anxiety. Totally. Sometimes, and this is where I talked about in a recent episode, I think I called it clues and cues, and that oftentimes these like twitching, jerks, etc., those are clues. They're telling you that you're anxious. Sometimes people don't even realize we have anxiety. Totally. I remember when I went to my doctor, I was telling her I don't have anxiety. This is not keeping me awake. Something is really wrong with me. I mentioned my heart beats fast and I feel twitching. I then came to realize that my heart was beating fast with the thought of going to sleep. This revealed, check that one out. Yeah, absolutely. The thought, the thought, oh my, I'm going to go to sleep, create emotion, hyperarousal anxiety, and that caused actually a reaction. And that's another one. I haven't talked about that, but it can be action, inaction, and reaction. So reaction is like that, heartbeat, etc. Gave me a little power. This revealed the truth for me, and it gave me a little power. I understood I indeed had anxiety, that I can try to work on the root problem. Negative emotions made me feel weird physically. I think people that have never experienced anxiety and developed chronic insomnia can be sometimes hard to identify anxiety about sleep. So they go on thinking it's an illness and keep going in that rabbit hole to find the right cure when the right cure is working on your thoughts. There's a question mark there. I think you should just put an exclamation mark there, Emelina. That is exactly right. It's totally right. I'm going to read that one more thing with an exclamation mark instead. I think people that have never experienced anxiety and develop chronic insomnia can sometimes find it hard to identify anxiety about sleep. So they go on thinking it's an illness and keep going in that rabbit hole to find the right cure when the right cure is working on your thoughts. 100,000%. I totally agree there. All right. So we have one more live question here from Zoltan. I'm a hypochondriac, so anxiety does drive a lot of my daily thoughts and activities, but I do try to better myself every day. That's fantastic, Zoltan. And I'm learning more and more about anxiety, and the big thing there is that anxiety is there for a reason. Anxiety like back in the day, back a couple of 1,000 years ago, it was super important for us to have a lot of anxiety because there were things we had to be worried about. Our physical, we were literally threatened by things out in nature that could kill us. So it was super important for us to be on the lookout, right? But fast forward to 2020, there aren't that many physical threats out there, but our brains are still wired the same way. Our brains are still wired to find threats, to make sure we're safe. And sometimes our brain kind of locks into stuff it shouldn't lock into. Like it can literally lock into like the emotion of anxiety and say like, I feel this way, I'm anxious, what's wrong? I'm looking for threats, and then the anxiety itself becomes a threat and becomes worse. So the path, I believe, totally is like when you're feeling anxious, identify, like announce it, like I am anxious. That in itself helps your brain, because then the brain is like, okay, you're getting it, you're getting my signals, that's good. That in itself can reduce the hyperarousal. And then when you are in a state where by not doing anything, eventually, anxiety subsides. And when you're in a state where you're not as anxious, or, when it's not really affecting you so much, when you can think clearly, etc., then you can start trying to identify what thoughts are driving the anxiety, write them down and start working on them. I think that is the way. And we'll explore this a lot going forward as well. Zoltan, stay in touch, Ernest, thanks so much for chiming in, and thanks everybody for sending me questions, and we will end there, and I'll be back maybe tomorrow, but if not, then definitely next week. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.